Love under the scope.
Welcome back to Love Under the Scope. This is a show where we will explore all of the ups and downs that come with being in a long-term relationship with another human being. It's not always perfect. It's not always pretty. There hopefully is a lot of love and a lot of care and trust involved. And because we are growing, learning, communicating frequently with each other, there will naturally be misunderstandings. We may push each other's buttons. There will be obstacles and challenges that we face along the way. And that's not a bad thing. I like to believe that challenges are good for us. I don't know if we grow as a couple or as an individual without looking in the mirror, reflecting, and doing the work on ourselves that our relationships can actually call us into. Being in a relationship is like looking in the mirror 24/7 at your own shit. And if you treat it as a learning opportunity, you can actually work on yourself by working on how you treat your partner, how much you love your partner. I like to say that I'm always learning to love my fiance better. I am your host, Kelby Lauren. I am a certified relationship coach. I also help my clients with self-love. I work with couples, I work with individuals to address frustrating patterns that keep us from feeling love, from feeling connection, and can come up over and over again in our relationships. Even if you're a single person, we still will have these patterns that come up. And it can be hard to navigate those on your own. It's not impossible. We certainly can do it. But especially if you're at the beginning of your inner work journey, having somebody to guide you through the process is very helpful. So that's what I do. I also happen to be in a long-term relationship, a relationship that really showed me how passionate I am about dynamics between two partners and what it looks like to slowly learn to become a team. It's not something that we just do overnight. Typically, two people don't get together and automatically feel like they're on a team. In my experience, there will be some kind of challenge that comes before we can accomplish being in a dynamic like that, before we can enjoy the fruits of being in a team like that, which, by the way, I had a TikTok comment on one of my videos that was about how our limiting beliefs about the opposite sex can keep us from growing and from being connected to our partner. And the person said, well, what do you suggest? That we're just single forever? And my response was absolutely not. I am so passionate about relationships, about fulfilling romantic relationships. And I think for me and a lot of people out there, having a fulfilling relationship where you feel like a team, it's like supercharging your life. Anything you want from your career, anything you want in your familial life or your sexual life, all of those buckets can be amplified by having a team dynamic with your partner. And so when I address in this show the kind of nitty-gritty hard stuff, it's not because relationships are always hard and they suck and love is horrible, love is hard. It's not because of that. It's because when we do address these things, when we face the shit, then we can create something really beautiful because we're aware of what's going on and we can actually take the power back and make the choices that we need to in order to achieve that loving, compassionate, trusting relationship. In today's episode, we're going to talk about how you are not mad at your partner for the reason that you think. Have you ever felt annoyed or angry or upset by your partner? That's what we're going to talk about today. Specifically, we're going to get into triggers. I'm sure you guys know what a trigger is because that psychology lingo has kind of been tossed around a lot on TikTok. And so you probably know that a trigger is when you are going about your day, you might think that you're totally fine, or maybe you even feel a little bit frustrated or annoyed. And then your partner says something or does something, and a switch is flipped, and suddenly you are suffering inside of yourself. You are pissed, you are sad, you are hurt, and you are suffering. The interesting thing about triggers is that we may not even know exactly what it was about what our partner said or did that was triggering. It can be really confusing when you're inside of the emotions of a trigger to sort out what happened. Actually, I've noticed and heard from clients that it can be hard to actually recall what was even said or done, much less to understand the source of the emotions, why we feel the way we do. There's something that happens in our brain that we can sometimes blank or even maybe black out and completely forget or not be able to recall what happened, what was said, what was done. How did we get to where we are now? A lot of the times it's those little things too. It could be something about laundry or dishes, and suddenly we've spiraled out of control, and now we're right back in that argument that we have had 1,000 times. In this episode, I'm going to start out by talking about what exactly is a trigger, what happens in the precise moment of the trigger, then what happens after the trigger has occurred, how we can let ourselves get swept away by this huge wave of emotions. And finally, I'm going to speak on how we can not get swept away, how we can address the issue within ourselves and in the relationship with our partner so that we are not as prone to getting swept away by the emotions and letting them ruin our day, our week, our relationship. We will start out by identifying what exactly is a trigger. In terms of this episode, a trigger is a moment of upset that seems to be caused by some external factor. That factor in this case being our partner. Something they did, something they said. A trigger can happen when we are seemingly okay. We think we're fine and maybe we're even feeling good. And then the trigger flips that switch. Or we are already annoyed. Maybe we're out at a party. Our partner is doing something that is annoying to us, that is frustrating. And there's a slow build of upset. Usually there will, even in that case, be a moment, something that is like the final straw where our partner says or does something. And again, that switch is flipped. Triggers can go by many names. I'm using that term because it's what feels good for me, but you could also say my partner is pushing my buttons. That's my hot button. You might call a trigger a cause. He made me feel this way. Could be a stressor or a catalyst or even a stimulus. I personally like the word trigger because I do feel that it carries some emotional weight with it. It gives it some oomph, which is exactly what we feel when we're triggered. We feel a lot of emotions. That's the whole point. A lot of the time, a trigger can be narrowed down to a very precise moment. So we walk into the room, we notice our partner is doing something very specific, and in that moment, that very specific, particular moment, the trigger happens. It's like a gun going off. It's very quick. Everything that occurs after that would be the aftershock or the aftermath of the trigger. The wave of emotions that can wash over you would be the post-trigger experience. Of course, there are other times where we feel upset with our partner in general. Maybe there's a period of 6 months where we're annoyed and we're upset or we're disappointed. That's not really what I'm talking about in this episode. maybe I'll talk about that in another episode, where we're upset in a way that feels like a festering wound. Although within that maybe 6-month period of being upset or annoyed, there certainly could be triggers sprinkled within that. We're feeling like they don't love us, they don't value us, and then they do or say something that feels like it is reinforcing that belief for us. Let's break down a trigger moment to moment. I like to do this because it could be really helpful if we want to feel into what we're experiencing throughout a trigger in order to actually do the work and overcome it. I think it's helpful to break down the sequence of a trigger. Before we do that, though, I want to mention that a lot of these things that I'm going to talk about happen subconsciously. So if we are going to do some work on them, it can require either a lot of focus, a lot of inner awareness, which takes time to build. If you haven't ever done, for example, meditation or just done any kind of self-reflection, this is not something that you just wake up and you understand how to do it. The subconscious mind is called subconscious for a reason. We're not conscious of it in our daily life for the most part. And so uncovering these things, it can take some time and also the help of a coach or a therapist. Just know that as I walk through this sequence, you might go, oh, I don't know if I've ever experienced that. And it could be because it's happening beneath the surface of your awareness. You can also use actually hypnotherapy as a really cool way to go underneath that top layer of our awareness and see what's going on at a deeper level. We are going to start with what is happening before the trigger. This is very helpful when you are going to self-reflect and break down the trigger itself. Let's go back to before it even happened. How were you feeling? What had just occurred before you felt set off? Were you stressed about something? Were you feeling really good about something? And then the trigger brought you all the way down. What was going on for you before the trigger happened? Try to identify and actually put words to what you were feeling. Were you feeling unappreciated? Were you feeling vulnerable? That can be a big one. Were you feeling unseen, unimportant? What did you feel before, even if it was something positive? I, in my experience, have felt very positive emotions of feeling good about myself. And then the trigger came in and it was like a balloon being popped. So that's the first part of a trigger. What's happening before? Then we have the actual trigger. When a trigger happens, it's often like a blink of the eye or being hit with a brick. It's this very instantaneous, precise moment. And in fact, it can feel quite confusing, disorienting sometimes because it might feel like we're being thrown into a pit of emotion, of frustration, anger, sadness, worry, grief, fear, you name it. Suddenly, in the blink of an eye, we are suffering. We're suffering because we perceive our partner saying or doing something, which then means something to us. The funny part is your partner doesn't have to be doing or saying something that's particularly offensive. They could ask you, hey, how you doing? And that's a trigger for you because of what you were experiencing before or during that moment. In my experience, it can be really difficult sometimes to put words to the trigger. It can be quite the visceral experience. And so to actually describe what is going on will be very different from person to person. And on top of that, we might experience a moment of blanking, of blacking out and completely dissociating when the trigger happens. That being said, I want to say here that it can be very helpful when you're self-reflecting, when you're wanting to move through the trigger, to be able to pinpoint the crystallized moment of the trigger. So I was walking through the house, I turned the corner, I looked into the bedroom, and I saw my partner doing blank. Now, this exact moment, I'm bringing myself back there. This is the precise crystallized moment of the trigger. It's kind of like the height of the entire experience. If you're looking at a movie plot, it's the plot line that sets off the action of the rest of the story. It's the first gunshot in a battle. Because that moment of trigger can be difficult to identify and to describe, it's important to learn how to bring yourself back there as much as possible, although it can be triggering to go back to the trigger. If you want to close your eyes and visualize and feel that feeling of when you turned the corner and you saw X happening. We want to be able to slow that moment down, moment by moment. Yes, we're talking about a very precise moment here, so millimoment by millimoment. We really want to slow it down, not because we want to torture ourselves and relive that horrible experience just because, but because we're wanting to identify and be with the root cause, which is usually inside of us. Yes, we can point the finger at our partner, but ultimately, what is going to help us the most is being able to identify the root of the trigger within us. And the best way to do that is to go and bring ourselves back to that moment. I want to mention here that your trigger doesn't have to make sense, at least right now, or even in the long run. It doesn't have to make sense in order for you to be justified in the way you feel and to accept the way that you feel. Most of us are not crazy. We don't just get triggered because it's fun and enjoyable. We have reasons that we feel trigger. If you listen to my podcast, you will know that I talk a lot about childhood conditioning and past relationships, past experiences around love. Those experiences and that conditioning are usually the root of our triggers. Now, if you haven't addressed your childhood conditioning or your past experiences, a trigger can feel random. Well, I don't really know why this happens. I might be crazy. We can feel crazy until we go back and see, oh, this is why this triggers me. Usually there is a root from our conditioning that explains with a lot of reason, a lot of logic, why we feel the way we do in a moment of trigger. What is happening in the moments after the trigger occurs? Now, this will vary from person to person based on how much inner reflection and work you have done, what the trigger actually is, what you are experiencing, what are your circumstances. This will vary. So I'm going to give a very general explanation of what could happen for you after a trigger. In general, in the moments after a trigger, we will begin to elaborate on that instantaneous crystallized story that we told ourselves that hit us like a brick in the face in the moment of the trigger. We will begin to spin an entire tale around that trigger, whether it is true or not. And I will say for the most part that it is not true. Not because I want you to feel crazy, not because you are wrong or bad, but because generally the part of us that's telling the story is a defense mechanism. It's an inner child piece that doesn't know how to make sense of what's going on. It is trying to protect us. That is going to tell us anything it thinks we need to hear in order to stay quote unquote safe, guarded, and not open us up to the vulnerability of reaching out for connection. So in the moments after that trigger, some people will experience a huge flood of emotions, like a big wave coming over you that's going to sweep you away in sadness, fear, anger, worry. Some people feel a complete shutdown. They go completely numb. I want to shut myself away and I don't want to deal with this right now. I cannot handle this. Some people lose the ability to express themselves in the moments after a trigger. In my life, I know I have felt an actual wall, an energetic wall in my throat that was keeping me from speaking how I felt after feeling triggered. Some people will hear a voice in their head feeding them a script based off of their childhood conditioning. Well, he doesn't really love you. He thinks you're disgusting. He doesn't think you're important, and he doesn't care about you, and he's probably going to leave you. So you should leave him before he leaves you. Oh, it's so cruel saying it out loud. It's so cruel. It's our inner saboteur, if you listen to my episode about self-sabotage, coming out to play. And she or he is going, "Oh, delightful. This is my time to shine. What can I tell her that is going to keep her from reaching out for love and reaching out to repair this trigger?" Could also be, like I said, an inner child that is very scared, that doesn't want to be reprimanded or abandoned or made to feel wrong. And so how does a child deal with those feelings? They will shut down, they will cry, and they will go into self-defense mode the way a child does. A child is quite crafty in the ways that they learn to deal with the world, their caregivers, their circumstances. They will come up with lots of creative ways to deal. And although they are creative and actually admirable, if we're talking about a child, a 5-year-old, those same methods that we came up with as a 5-year-old can keep us from connecting and deepening our relationship with our partner. Speaking of the inner child, we might have this feeling that we are back in the past. This is an interesting practice to actually go back and notice, whoa, did I feel like I was back in my past? Did I feel like I was taken out of the present when that trigger happened and in the moments after it? So let's say that you are being swept away by your emotions. You might feel like you're going into that vortex, that black hole that's totally sucking you into this victim mode. Yeah, let's get her in here and make her feel real horrible about herself. I know I have felt that way. It's very tempting to choose to be swept away by the emotions. When we do that, it may lead to an argument breaking out. Somebody is giving the cold shoulder, perhaps. There's a disconnection between partners. We're not wanting to reach out because we're so swept up by our emotions. A lot of the times, both partners are telling them a story that we think on a subconscious level is helping us from getting hurt further, but is actually keeping us from repairing and coming back together and reconnecting. I know in my experience, when I have let my emotions sweep me away, it can feel like the day is ruined or that experience is ruined. We went to this theme park, we were having a great time, a trigger happened. Well, now that experience is ruined for me. In general, when we are allowing ourselves to be swept away by emotion, we are going deeper and deeper into victim mode and blaming our partner. I know the word choosing to be swept away might sound odd because a lot of the time we're not consciously choosing that. It's simply a pattern that we have adopted over time. This trigger happens, I respond this way, I am swept away, and it takes me a day, 2 days, 3 days to get over it. It's still a choice. I'm telling myself that too, by the way. It's still a choice. We choose whether or not we want to pull ourselves out of that vortex of pure emotion that is telling us usually a string of lies based on our past. In that moment, we really want to believe that our partner is the reason for all of our problems. They are the cause of my suffering. For whatever reason, in that victim mode, it can even feel good to say, he did this to me. It's your fault. It's almost like you're torturing yourself too, because you're keeping yourself trapped in unpleasant feelings, in suffering. In those moments, we are basically taking our power and giving it up to our emotions. Yes, emotions can be powerful. I am a lover of intuitively using our emotions as a guide for our lives in a way. And if we can't address that our emotions are simply an experience that we are having, that we can choose to have or not to have compassion for, or to shame ourselves for, then our emotions take the driver's seat. And then we are just being driven around like a madman. We're in the passenger seat, just being flung around. Like, what the hell is going on? And we're just flying off the handle unexpectedly, which is not pleasant for our partner, obviously, or for ourselves. If you are a person who has felt that way, hot and cold, you know that it's not fun. It's not a great experience to be in, to be flung around, feeling like you have no control over your emotions. Now, triggers are not something to be ashamed of. You are not a bad person because you get triggered. There's nothing wrong with you. You are a human being. Human beings experience triggers. All of us, even people who are very much evolved as far as their emotions and they've mastered their emotions, can still at least experience a trigger, even if they're not allowing themselves to get swept away by the emotions. What if we looked at our triggers with some compassion and treated them as a sign of something that is needing to be addressed within us, an opportunity to self-reflect and grow emotionally and spiritually? That's what a trigger is. In my opinion, a trigger is life serving you an experience on a platter and going, do you want to work on this? You can choose yes or no. Neither answer is bad, but you have a choice. Do you want to look at this shit and transform it? And that's what we're going to talk about next. How can you be with your triggers and actually use them as fertilizer for supercharging your growth? I'm going to preface this by saying that there's no perfect way to do this. You'll probably find hundreds of ways that people explain and teach how to do this. This is my personal method that I use with myself, that I teach my clients, and it takes time. These steps that I'm about to describe, they take time. We don't sit down in a matter of 45 minutes and complete steps 1 through 4 and we're just done. And okay, I addressed that trigger and it's never going to affect me again. These things take time. If you can bring in some kind of compassion and patience for yourself, nobody grows overnight. A flower doesn't grow from a seed into a blooming flower in a matter of a day. So everything takes time. And actually, that's the beauty of the process. If we got everything we wanted in the snap of our fingers, it wouldn't be quite as satisfying, would it? So taking into account throughout these steps to bring in compassion and patience whenever you can. And if you haven't ever learned to bring in compassion and patience for yourself, that's something else that you can work with a coach like myself or a therapist with, because it can take some learning and practice to build in that layer of self-love before we endeavor in something like this process. The first step to working with your trigger is to slow down, to actually be with the emotions that are coming up with the trigger and to name them as best as you can. Can you actually label what you are feeling with your trigger? Are you feeling anger, sadness, grief, worry, fear, frustration? Can get very specific. There are so many words. I would Google synonyms for sad. Are you devastated? Are you disappointed? Are you upset? Are you raging? Are you ticked off? Get very specific about the emotions. There could be multiple. It might be a wave. You might have started out feeling angry and then you felt sad and disappointed. And then maybe there was a time during that wave that you felt numb. You felt nothing. get specific. And there's no wrong answer. It's not better if you felt angry and worse if you felt numb. Yes, it can be difficult to actually be with the emotions. And be careful with this because we don't want to bring ourselves fully back to the experience if it didn't feel safe. So we want to have an understanding within ourselves that we're safe and that we're not actually back there. We're just sitting with. I like to think of a metaphor I read in The Power of Focusing. She talks about how we can sit next to our emotions like we sit next to a lake. We're not diving into the lake, we're sitting next to it and looking into it. That's the intention here when we're slowing down and being with the emotions. This is something that gets easier with time and practice. The more that we practice being with our emotions, the easier it will be, although emotions can be difficult no matter how experienced you are. It's just a matter of leaving that space in between, oh, I'm fully back into the emotion and I'm just sitting with the emotion. And tears may still come up and rage may still come up, but I'm still just being with the emotion in a compassionate way. In other words, I'm noticing and I'm curious about what I'm feeling rather than being judgmental and going, oh, I hate that I was angry, or oh, it's so stupid that I was sad or vulnerable. Step 2 would be to start to self-reflect. In this phase, you can go in and notice, what was the story I told myself during and after the trigger? I mentioned before that a lot of this is subconscious, and sometimes the story will be subconscious and it will require some deep focus and meditation to bring awareness to what that story was. Other times, the story is being screamed at us by this internal voice. You are not good enough. You suck. He's going to leave you, whatever the case may be. And so person to person, it will vary whether you're able to tune into that story and that narrative with clarity and how quickly that will take for you. In my last episode, I talked about beliefs and how it can be really helpful to distill a belief down to a simple phrase. I would say that idea it comes into play here. So can you distill the story down to, instead of a whole paragraph, maybe you're able to distill the story down to, he doesn't love me. He doesn't think I'm special. How can you distill the story down to something that's brief and digestible so that you can then work on it a little more easily? Also, when we're distilling it down to a brief phrase, I find that it can be helpful to use the most poignant part of the story. Okay, so he doesn't love me. That is very deep cutting, rather than he did this and then he said that and the look in his eyes was this and blah 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 and he doesn't love me. Okay, so we really want to distill it down to the most emotional, the most hurtful, the most aggravating part of the story if possible. I'll give you an example. You're at a party. Your partner is going around talking to everybody, having a great time. It's been 3 hours and he is still not checking in with you. He's very much involved with everybody there. Maybe he hasn't seen those people in a very long time and he's having a great time and he's caught up in the fun. And then 3 hours in, he comes up to you and goes, hey, what's up? That's the trigger. And the story that you are telling yourself is, he doesn't notice me. He doesn't care that I'm suffering. The way that he said, hey, what's up? I made that mean within myself that he is so nonchalant about my suffering. So that story would be, again, he doesn't care about me and he doesn't notice that I'm suffering. For this part, I mentioned that it can be subconscious. And when we're working with the subconscious, there's this visualization that you can do of taking an elevator 1 floor deeper into what is going on. We're feeling beneath the blaming, the victimhood, and we're feeling deeper, as if we were taking an elevator 1 or 2 levels deeper into our subconscious mind. That can be helpful in order to actually go beneath the surface level of what we think is going on, and is actually a piece of our past that's coming up to push our buttons. Once you have identified that story, and let's say you were able to narrow it down to He doesn't notice that I'm suffering. I want you to feel if you have ever felt that before in your life. Did you ever feel that with your mom or your dad or a sibling, maybe an ex-partner? Have you felt that maybe with multiple people in your life? And when was the first time? Was the first time, it doesn't have to be the precise first time. It was May 30th in 1997. It's just a general, oh yeah, I remember feeling that when I was 7. And it doesn't even have to be accurate. We're just wanting to know, does this come from somewhere else in your past? Perhaps you are now projecting it onto the present situation. Once you have done steps 1 through 3, which can take place over a long period of time, months, years, then we will move into doing the work, step 4. Now, doing the work could be happening simultaneously as you go through the previous steps. I mentioned earlier that this doesn't have to be chronological. There's not this specific way to do this kind of work. But the idea here is that we're wanting to, once we've reflected and found the root cause as best as possible, you don't have to get that perfect, as much as possible identifying that, then we can do the work. We can make change. We can choose different ways of dealing with our triggers. When we're doing the work, can we ask ourselves, what would be a more supportive and compassionate way for me to approach my triggers? I say compassionate, not just for your partner, but for you. What would be a self-compassionate way to deal with your triggers so that you don't have to continue flogging yourself and suffering? For this step, I really enjoy a lesson from A Course in Miracles. There is a workbook at the end of that book, and there are, I think, 365 lessons, all of which are quite amazing. Lesson 5 is, I am not upset at blank for the reason I think. I love this one. I've been using it a lot recently. I'm not annoyed at my neighbor for the reason I think. I'm not angry at my partner for the reason that I think. This isn't to gaslight yourself. It's to get to the truth. We're just wanting truth here. Our subconscious and our conscious mind can feed us lies. That's the truth. We feed ourselves lies because it's what we become used to as a result of our childhood or other experiences, and a desire to keep ourselves quote unquote safe, right? The ego just wants us to be safe and for nothing to change, and let's just keep everything as is so I never have to lose control, right? Control that we never could have anyway. The whole point here is to address the fact that triggers are an inside job. Nobody can go within you and start a trigger. We see something or we hear something, it's a perception. We make it mean something, and then that is what happens with a trigger. That's the catalyst for a trigger. So we want to own that our trigger is always an inside job. It's not because we want to punish ourselves. It's because we want to take back the power and no longer allow the trigger to control us. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't also establish and request boundaries with your partner around that trigger. Absolutely. Going back to the party example, you could work on your trigger while also requesting that your partner check in with you every hour at a party, for example. Owning the fact that a trigger is an inside job doesn't mean that you can't request different behavior from your partner. There's a balancing act, I would say. Hey, do you think maybe you could help me by phrasing it this way next time? And I'm also going to self-reflect and see if I can get to the root of why I got so upset when you said it this way, this other way. I think I called that step 4, doing the work. That's actually step 3. Step 4 is acknowledging your wins. As you self-reflect, you're being with your emotions, you're doing some work, you're making changes in your choices, you're setting boundaries. can you look back at how far you've come and acknowledge your growth? This is really important for any kind of emotional or spiritual work because it's not always obvious in our face or in our physical reality, the changes that we make within ourselves. And so always using the acknowledgement of our wins like a checkpoint. Hey, a year ago, I would have blown up and I would have yelled and screamed. And now I am pausing and I'm breathing and I'm being with my anger and I'm acknowledging that my partner is not the cause of my anger. And yeah, I still get pissed off and I still have an urge to throw something, but I'm not doing that anymore. So acknowledging how far we've come and celebrating. Yay, yay, I've made improvement. That's a big deal, even if it's just a little change. There's no change that is small, actually, or huge. Real change happens incrementally. So, I wouldn't expect to make huge, massive strides. I was really upset one time because I got a palm reading and the woman told me that every time I take 2 steps forward, I take 1 step back. And I freaked out. I went home and called my aunt that I'm very close with, and I was upset. I was crying. I was angry. And I was like, it's true. I do that. I really do take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And she goes, Kelby, everybody does that. That's how anybody changes. Change isn't just exponential, a straight line if you're looking at a graph. Change happens in waves and it ebbs and it flows. So please do not expect when you're doing work like this, it can be quite difficult. We're excavating our past and we're bringing stuff up so that we can look at it. Please, I ask you, don't expect that this is going to be a beautiful walk in the park. And at the same time, it's so worth doing because we are showing life. I am ready to take back my power. I'm no longer going to be a victim who is reacting to things that happen in my life. I am choosing how my life goes. I am creating my life by making choices. Okay, that's empowerment. That is real empowerment, if you ask me. Thank you so much for listening today to Love Under the Scope. It is always a pleasure to show up here and talk. Very fun for me. If you liked this show, please do think about giving me a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, liking the video if you are watching on YouTube. If you'd like to connect on social media, I am on Instagram at Coached by Kelby. You can also reach out to me via email if you have questions that you'd like me to answer anonymously, or if you'd like to work with me, you can reach out to me. I am coachedbykelby@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening again, and I will see you next Friday.